Thank you. That's quite a comprehensive picture of what we hope to sort of build, in a sense, at Paris. It'd be interesting to get some additional reflections from other panelists on that, but I do want to sort of pause for a second to flag the important distinction you drew between regulation of carbon dioxide and other gases as greenhouse gases versus having their reduction happen as the result of the pursuit of various co-benefits such as energy security, air pollution, and so on, which is so far is the approach that really India has followed, and it would be something perhaps important to pick up later on in the panel. Can I turn to Mr. Lavasa to see if you have any reflections on these points, in particular on this design question around Paris or on the technology issue?
Thank you, Navroz. Couple of points. One, of course, is this assessment about whether it will all add up to achieving the collective goal. I think now that many countries have already declared their INDCs, and some of them will do in the next few days, the impact of all these actions, what is that going to be? And before that analysis is made, I think it would be also a good idea to see what has been the effort and achievement as far as the pre-2020 actions that were committed as a part of the Kyoto Protocol commitments. What has been the level of achievement? Whether countries have fallen short? Why have they fallen short? Because if we are talking about making commitments which we are determined to fulfill, and that is where the Paris Agreement, which is about post-2020, while we put together this agreement and operationalize it beyond 2020, it is equally important that when we are dealing with climate change issues, we are also looking at actions right now and in the build-up to 2020. Paris, as I said earlier, it's about removing barriers. And what are those barriers? I think one of the first barrier probably is of understanding. So whether we are understanding our objectives correctly, and I think we need to also see that I heard that it's about the UNFCCC itself probably getting modified. Our understanding is that Paris Agreement is taking the place of the Kyoto Protocol, and the United Nations Framework Convention is not being negotiated. So I think the principles that have been enshrined in the convention, those principles will stay, should stay for the overall interests of everybody. The second point is, which is also linked to removing barriers, that is about the level of ambition. You know, if you look at the dictionary, the meaning of ambition or ambitious is something that you are determined to achieve. And there is another meaning, and that is something which is difficult to achieve. So while on the determination, I think there should be no question. On the difficulties, there has to be an appreciation of what the difficulties are and how those difficulties can be overcome. We are dealing with greenhouse gases. While they might originate in a particular place or a country, they don't stay confined to that country, and they affect everybody around us. So therefore, I think it's a collective burden and it's a collective responsibility. So that perhaps is the spirit in which we need to understand the complexity of these issues. And the final point that I would like to make is that we do recognize the fact that technology and technological development in the world has been driven by private enterprise. It has been promoted and supported by governments, but substantial part of technological development does lie in the hands of private institutions or individuals or corporates. But when nations are sitting around, can we try and bring together an arrangement by which the transfer of this technology becomes easier, becomes less prohibitive as far as costs are concerned? We in India, for example, we have a technology mission where we have put together number of technologies where we would like assistance from wherever they exist. But what is standing in the way of accessing those technologies? I think people here, especially from the industry, would know these better. So as you move towards accessing these technologies, what are the enabling factors? And further, India has also suggested that why can we not put together a joint research and development effort? The world can put together a joint research and development effort to access future technologies or to develop future technologies. I think that will create a lot of confidence in the developing countries as they pursue this alternate path of sustainable development.
Thank you, Mr. Lavasa. Ambassador, would you like to come in on any of these questions?
Yeah, just a word on the technology aspect maybe. I think I mentioned during my speech the importance of the agreement to create a dynamic, and that is, I think, the core of the question. What the INDCs will not be static, there will be implementation. Technologies will not be static, money will not be static. So the movement which will be created by an agreement in Paris will modify these different parameters during the decades to come and create visibility, predictability for the business community by expanding the market, showing the direction. And this will trigger investment in new technologies. This will trigger more effort, more competition. We've seen, for example, in India, the price of solar energy going down from 10 rupees per kilowatt hour to 6. So this is possible. So this dynamic is very important, and I don't want to be seen as over-optimistic, but even the goals which seem ambitious today may become very easy to reach in 20 years from now if that dynamic is created. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that also speaks to Jake Worksman's point earlier about whether or not and how the INDCs as a process are able to harness all this change and this sort of dynamism. And I want to turn to the audience soon, but before I do that, I actually want to come back to Mr. Clement, who I think got a question about carbon pricing and so on, which I think is a little, it's not directly salient to the kind of context we're talking about here. I think the sort of the dynamism of national processes, the building up to Paris, is really where a lot of the action is. And I'm curious to ask you, from your position at Ernst & Young with a team of 700 people, do you have a lot of, and you're the only one in a sense in that space of the panel, you have sort of researchers like myself, you have people in governments and so on, you're directly out there in that interface with the private sector. Do you see that process of INDC creation having led to a lot more demands for the kinds of technical expertise and advice that you all offer to think about how this transition might be happening? Do you see actual changes happening in countries or plans for those changes happening as a result of this INDC process? I'm sorry, but let me just clarify. By INDC, I mean intended nationally determined contributions, or this process of each country saying what it's going to do. I should not lapse into jargon. Please.
Well, I think it's a great question. So clearly, if we make an assessment of where are we, and we take into consideration the very good description of the process and of the aspirational goals we have in relation to the Paris discussions made by our colleague from the European Commission, what we see now is that we have like a number of regional initiatives, a number of countries that over the last few years have been having discussions or implementing carbon pricing instruments, and we have to agree and accept and realize that as part of that process, there has been a lot of innovation in relation to the different alternatives to put a price on carbon. So the situation in Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, the pilots in China, the discussions we are having within the European Union, the programs in the US. So in the end, we can see a number of regional initiatives that are putting on the table, at least on paper, the importance of carbon pricing. And it doesn't matter whether it is a negative price because you are subsidizing investment in renewable energy. In the end, we are talking about the same. So that's a reality. But my point is that that reality is having a very limited impact on the economy. So we are far from having an impact on the economy by developing those initiatives because the ambition is not there yet. The second thing is those commitments and the contributions that are made by countries are clearly putting on the table the need to start having discussions and economic policy debates on what may be the contribution of the effort of a country or cities or even the business community in relation to this kind of contributions and commitments. And here in India, for example, one of the discussions is whether, for example, this new regulation on the 2% investment on CSR programs may also become one of the tools or one of the instruments to mobilize the business community towards any kind of effort that the India's government or India as an economy can make to support any kind of commitments in relation to Paris. So the second thing is that we have the regional initiatives, some signals, some innovation, some of them quite sophisticated, and the second thing we have is a number of contributions and commitments that are very far from what are our needs. So, and it is true that we can change and bridge the gap by doing a number of things. So one is clearly the need to review the contributions made by countries and the commitments made by countries. The other one is the possibility of discussing instruments that can make more international or can help the different regional initiatives better interact, or countries make also a contribution, so like the new market mechanisms that can contribute to increase or to help us bridge the gap. But my point at the beginning, and this has to do with your question, is that we can have a number of things on the table that clearly tell us and demonstrate that we are making progress, but despite of the interest of the international community, the United Nations, the European Commission, or the French government in getting closer to the business community and mobilizing the business community to better understand and to participate in the discussions, and we have a number of examples over the last few months of mobilization of the business community. We have to make a more relevant effort to get everybody on board. Because, again, and I don't want to undermine the importance of some of the messages that we have put here on the table. We have to make the discussions on carbon pricing mainstream as part of the economic policy. That has to be part of our daily reality. And we are not there yet. We can be there. We will get there. I'm sure of that, and I'm very optimistic. But we have to realize that we have to continue making efforts in working and making more aware our business community of the importance of internalizing a price in relation to carbon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to now turn to audience questions. On paper, we only have 5 minutes, but we started late, so I think we can take an additional 10 minutes. I was planning to do that anyway, but I just got a note from the organizers saying that, in fact, they give us their blessing to take an extra 10 minutes. So we have at least 15 minutes for questions. It's a little hard to see people. I see a question already in the corner there. Just as a broad guideline, if you could please introduce yourself, just your name and your affiliation, and keep the question to under 30 seconds, if you would, and try and make it actually a question rather than a comment. That would really be wonderful for the purpose of having interaction with our panel. So please, sir, why don't you start?
I am N.C. Gupta from Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University. My question is to Ashok Lavasa. Sir, India has announced its I&DC, under I&DC that 175 gigawatts of power will be generated by renewable energy, as you told. Out of 175 gigawatt, 100 gigawatt by solar. And I also feel surprised that by 2022, it will be possible for India to realize the goal of 100 gigawatt, which looks very ambitious. Please comment on this.
Thank you for the question. Before I answer that, let me clarify two things. One, India has not declared its INDC so far. So the question of 175 gigawatts being announced as a part of INDC, I think that is factually not correct. Second thing is that you said 175 gigawatts of power generation, if I understood you correctly. So please understand that there is a difference between capacity installed and electricity generated. All forms of power generation, they have different efficiency factors. So 175 gigawatts is the installed capacity that is being talked about. And to answer the question about whether it will be possible, I thought I mentioned in my remarks in the beginning that 175 gigawatts is something which has not been done so far, something which has not been announced by any country. And the momentum which it has generated gives us confidence, gives us reasons to believe that with the participation of the investor community and with the kind of enabling framework which the government has created, with the investment which the government is making in making its transmission system robust, making the regulatory requirement for absorbing this electricity, I think we are confident that we should be able to achieve this goal.
Yeah, my name is Birendra Raturi. I come from Social Responsibility Asia. My question is to Mr. Lavasha. I would like to know that what are the 2-3 key indicators which India would be negotiating and confronting with the developed world. That's just my question to him.
Maybe let's collect a few questions, please.
Thank you. I am R.K. Khanna, former Chief Engineer with Central Water Commission, Government of India. Dealing with the climate change needs a lot of cooperation between various sectors, and I will talk about the water sector. IPCC reports have mentioned that the maximum impact of climate change of all the areas will be on water. So is it possible that some sort of group may be formed like Ministry of Water Resources, Ministry of Environment, government agencies, academic institutes like IITs, and maybe even the private sector like Ernst & Young, other companies. And they may do some detailed studies on the impact of climate change on water resources and adaptability approach. And because the funding is a constraint, maybe funding can come out of the negotiations. Mr. Lavasa and Mr. Clement can react to it.
Thank you for the question. We could, of course, delve into a lot of issues that pertain to the larger theme of this summit. But if we can, for the purpose of this session, try and keep it focused on the sort of this road to Paris kind of theme and the larger questions, and take advantage of the breadth of expertise in the panel, that would be wonderful. Please.
Hi, my name is Arinda Bhattacharya. I'm from Earth Union. So I have a very specific question to the entire panel. That in the context of the moving towards Paris, I'd just like to know one thing very clearly, because we talked about the converting the climate, the issue as an opportunity. So how, because we are not seeing that how this opportunity or this consequence of climate change can be converted into opportunity where the business community can feel like coming in spontaneously. So do you think that lack of that, convertibility, climate issue, the problem to an opportunity could be a barrier in Paris to come to an agreement?
Maybe you can just take these three questions first and come back for a second round. Mr. Lavasa, some of the questions were specific to you, so why don't you start?
Specifically, the concerns that we have, one of the concerns which actually was also mentioned by the speaker, the person who raised the question, was on adaptation. So water, I think, is an important area where we need to work. India has always held that because of the numerous difficulties that the climate change has posed to agriculture, to water sector, to animal husbandry, and the coastal region, as I said. So many of these sectors require a lot of action to be taken immediately, so that people get prepared and their vulnerability level is reduced to a certain extent. For example, if you look at the 8 national missions on climate change that have been launched by India, 5 of them are about adaptation. We have a mission on sustainable agriculture, we have a mission on water, and so on and so forth. We have a mission on habitat. In the context of agriculture particularly, take the case of paddy, which is grown substantially in many parts of the country. And paddy, for example, is a crop that requires a lot of water. It requires something like, in the north, 15 or 16 irrigations. And it requires water to stand in the field. Now, with the water table going down and with the rains not behaving the way they used to in the past, there is more pressure on the farmers to extract this water by using energy. And the water table is already depleting. So for producing the same quantity of crop, he has to use more energy and depend on what are already depleting sources of water. How does the farmer adapt himself to such a change? So only yesterday we were looking at one of the experiments that has been conducted on paddy, where there is a gel, hydrogen gel, which is being developed, which can be coated on the seeds, which reduces the quantity of water that paddy will require, and perhaps bring it down from the 15, 16 to 3 or 4 irrigation. Now, these are all very important initiatives which we will be required to take, which are being taken, and that is the reason why India has held that from the Green Climate Fund, 50% of the resources should be allocated for adaptation.
Thank you. Would any of the rest of the panel like to come in, particularly on this question of how exactly do we convert Paris into an opportunity?
I think this is a very important question, and the question proves that in the business community is not yet completely convinced and clear that an international agreement can trigger business opportunities. And it is not only the agreement which will trigger this, but the commitments by the governments on national policies, which will themselves open up new markets in which companies will invest. And I think this is, if you look at the INDCs in each country, you will see what will be the policies, what will be the government investments, what will be the directions. And automatically, business will shift where the market will develop. And I think this is how you turn a vision into a paper, and that paper into business opportunities.
Well, I think it is clear that climate change or water scarcity are economic challenges, environmental problems, and at the same time are opportunities. So one of the initiatives and one of the changes we have now on our road to Paris is the fact that the international community is trying to mobilize the business community to contribute to the Paris discussions by putting on the table what may be the business solutions to the main economic challenges and what may be the contribution of different sectors to the main environmental challenges. So the World Business Council has been organizing a number of panels on e-mobility, carbon CO2 emission sequestration, so a number of business opportunities that are there and clearly can play a role in shaping the new world economy. In addition to that, I think that one of the key challenges we have, again, and this is a very basic question, is to better understand what is the environmental and social impact of any business activity. And what is the interaction between the environmental problems and the economy. And that has to do with climate change, water scarcity, and a number of topics. And unless we start better understanding what is the reality and the consequences from an environmental and social perspective of running a business or of running an economy, it is going to be very difficult to make progress. We are having discussions on who pays the bill, who makes the higher contributions, but we are not having a lot of discussions to put more clarity on how we are contributing to create environmental and social problems and challenges. And that has to be part of the discussion, because if we don't agree and we don't share a common diagnosis of who is polluting or who is contaminating or who is affecting the climate, if we don't share the diagnosis, it is going to be difficult that we agree on how we can share the bill.
Very good. I think we have very little time left, so I'm going to take one more rapid fire round of just 2, at the most 3 questions, 15 seconds each. At the back of the room there.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay. I'm an independent consultant on climate change. My question is to the whole panel, especially I would like to know experiences in other countries about a legislation related to climate change. I studied in UK and they have a Climate Change Act which really streamlines the process of mitigation and adaptation.
All right.
Whereas countries have, in India there's a lot of chaos in the sector,
Okay,
who is doing what, how.
Thank you. We take a question on climate legislation. Anything else? Any other burning questions?
One question here. I'm Bhaskar Day from ONGC. My question is regarding the requirement of energy which is ever growing, at least in India. What is the stand of as regards the nuclear energy? And what I understand is there is a divergence of views, at least even in the EU. European Union is also not unanimous on the policies.
Okay.
So what should be our stand? And as far as the summit is concerned, what will be the stand in future?
Okay, so a specific question on nuclear energy. Yes, last question.
My question is about the work done by WBCSD and WRI in India lately. There have been several conversations and summits happening. How do we use the knowledge, because they are working very closely with the industry, and have a common dialogue, a common understanding of the whole thing, bring it to this forum, and then a common language, I believe. So how do we make that happen?
Okay. Maybe just 30 seconds each for anybody who wants to take on these questions. One on nuclear, one on climate legislation, and one on the WBS-PCSD initiative. Very quickly, please.
Thanks, Navroz, and thanks for the questions. In many ways, they go back to the question stated previously, is how do you convince companies that this is an opportunity and not a barrier? I think any company that has a deeply vested interest in the status quo is going to see, and which is largely a fossil fuel-based economy in many parts of the world, is going to see this as a barrier. The challenge of the regulator, to go to the question about what kind of legislation may work, is to put in place clear signals to industry that a significant transformation is underway. For the EU, that's been setting long-term binding targets to cap greenhouse gas emissions and to bring them down over time. And with that strong cap backed by serious domestic policy, that signal becomes unavoidable, and you begin to encourage industry to divest from the status quo and to begin to invest in a more sustainable future. In that context, with those strong long-term regulatory signals, you also need the flexibility to allow those investments to shift. We use carbon markets. Other parts of the world use different techniques. That's critically important to us. And you also, in our view, you remain technologically neutral. So to answer the question on nuclear technology, many member states favor it. As the ambassador pointed out, it's helped France become one of the lowest carbon economies on Earth. Others prefer other alternatives. Germany is an example of where very significant investments in renewables have helped them also go onto a low carbon path. So strong regulatory signals, but the flexibility that allows those kinds of transformations to take place in a cost-effective way.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to take this on? Mr. Lapasa or the ambassador?
No, just one word on the nukes. It's very simple. When you need energy, you tap whatever source you can. The problem is to identify those which are not emitting carbon or in a limited fashion, which can produce bulk energy at a cheap price, even at night, and even when there is no wind, so that the installed capacity can produce up to, let's say, 90-95% of electricity of the installed capacity, which other sources cannot produce. This is only possible with nuclear. So this is why we have chosen also this path, and will continue in the future having a majority of our electricity produced by nuclear means.
I wanted to come in on this issue of opportunity for the industry. I think if you look at one of the most successful missions which India has launched is the National Mission on Enhanced Energy Efficiency, and that is completely driven by the industry. It's done well. So here is an opportunity where companies can scout for cleaner technologies. Number two, they should learn to factor the social costs when they calculate their IRRs. They should collaborate in or individually invest more in R&D so that your pursuit for finding better technologies is also an indication of your determination. And finally, even though a lot of value is attached to the corporate social responsibility spending, I think there is a need for us to mainstream the cost of environment. It is not below the line expenditure which will satisfy. We have to mainstream. We have to understand that this should become a part of our essential calculus. When you calculate the cost and benefit, you have to factor in and see that the environment costs are above the line, not below the line.
Thank you very much to the panelists. It's going to be very hard to summarize the session. I'm sorry, sir, I think we've run out of time. You'll have to catch the panelists individually later. I'm just going to take a minute or so to perhaps give some guideposts of things that I saw from this discussion. It's very hard to have a discussion like this about a complex meeting that is for which many people have been preparing for years now, and really we can't come up with concrete messages, but what we can come up with perhaps is some indicators of what to watch for. So this is sort of a watch this space kind of summation, but maybe giving specific things to watch for that have come out of the discussion. I think the question about what exactly is the concrete opportunities for business is going to unfold as in the next 3 months and in the months after Paris. I think one of the things that will give us some clues to those opportunities are the details of these national contributions. So far, 63% of greenhouse gases are covered by contributions that are put on the table. That leaves still quite a bit left. So looking at the details of those, I think will give some clue. Will it in fact unleash all kinds of interesting opportunities and productivities in our societies, or will it be a bit of window dressing? I think we'll have to wait and see. I think Mr. Clement's point about the diagnostics, how do we actually understand what's going on? How do we build a framework for that, for those diagnostics, I think is going to be important to watch out for. Jake Worksman's point about the ratchet mechanism, that's a complex thing to build. How will this, how will these contributions be updated over time? On what basis? How will we ensure equity is taken care of as well as ambition in the context of doing that? That's something to really keep an eye on, I think, going into Paris. And then finally and not least, how do we square this bit difficult problem of the aspirations, particularly sitting here in India, of a lot of people starting at a very low base of economic development with both the responsibility and our own interests of addressing climate change. I'm glad Mr. Lavasa in his final intervention used the word mainstreaming, because I think that is actually an important part of the story. How do we actually think of this whole challenge, not as something that's an add-on, but work it into, for example, how we design our cities. So how do we design more livable cities that also have the effect of limiting greenhouse gases? And the scale of this change is enormous. I mean, the word revolution has come up a couple of times in this context, and I've heard it said that the kind of transformation we need is an increase in productivity per unit energy over the next 30 or 40 years that is analogous to the increase in productivity per unit labor that we achieved in the 150 years of the Industrial Revolution. So it really is a serious transformation that we're talking about, and for India the challenge is making that transformation happen even while we have all the social challenges and the institutional challenges of a country that is starting from a relatively low base with severe resource constraints. And so it's an exciting time, but it is also a challenging time, and I think the months ahead will give us a few more clues along these lines of how we understand both the challenge and the opportunity. So I just wish to thank Mr. Worksman, Mr. Morris, Mr. Clement, Ambassador Richer, and Mr. Lavasa. Thank you very much for a really stimulating panel. Thank you.